Here with this week's hottest stories in the investment world, this is Zacks Friday Finish Line.
Hello, and thanks for joining into this special edition of the Zacks Friday Finish Line.
Today, we're going to be speaking with Ethan Powell, the founder and president of Impact Shares. Ethan has been involved in the financial services industry for 20 years as an ETF and investment management innovator.
Ethan and his team recently announced the filing of two new funds, the Minority Empowerment and the Women's Empowerment ETFs, that offer a socially conscious investment strategy.
We take a look at both of these ETFs and together discuss the ways in which making a social impact is becoming more and more popular in investing and in our everyday lives. Check it out.
Hi, Ethan. Welcome to the show. So to start things off, can you talk about why Impact Shares wanted to launch the Minority Empowerment and the Women's Empowerment ETFs?
Sure. So obviously ESG is getting a lot of attention today in the investment space. And the sort of premise behind Impact Shares is that the E and the G are pretty well spoken for, and that most people know what a low-carbon portfolio looks like, and most people generally agree on what good corporate governance is. But that S, that social responsibility aspect, is oftentimes called the messy middle, in part because everyone's got very different social priorities, and understanding your own social priorities, let alone effectively communicating that to a financial intermediary and then constructing a portfolio around that, can be very, very difficult. So what we're doing is we're partnering with leading nonprofits in specific social issues like the NAACP and the YWCA as it relates to minority rights and women's empowerment. And we effectively say, okay, NAACP, what does a good corporate citizen look like through the lens of the NAACP, specifically as it relates to minority rights in the U.S.? And then we work with them on sort of capturing appropriate metrics to encourage specific social corporate outcomes. And then we measure corporate America based on those metrics and identify the top 200 to 300 performing companies that are doing the most to advance that specific social cause in the United States. We put them into a portfolio and optimize that relative to the broader market. So what we like to talk about is we're delivering financial beta while achieving social alpha. And that social alpha, instead of a superior risk-adjusted returns, it's really superior social outcomes relative to those specific causes that you feel passionately about. So that's kind of the premise, and obviously partnering with the NAACP and YWCA on minority and women empowerment is very topical today, given everything that's going on and everything we read in the media. It seems like on a never-ending daily basis.
That's actually a perfect transition into our second question, because I wanted to get to know more about these organizations that you've partnered with. You've mentioned the NAACP and the YWCA. Can you speak more about these partnerships and specifically why you chose these organizations and what made them stick out from other organizations that you could have partnered with?
Well, I think it's important to say that the Impact Shares platform is really, you can think of it as a utility to bridge capital to cause. And we are effectively issue agnostic. So the goal is at some point to have every social issue represented by a leading nonprofit available in a separately investable ETF so that the investing public can create a bespoke socially responsible investment portfolio that's truly reflective of their sort of complex social priorities. So it's not as though we're just going to partner with NAACP and YWCA. That's our first sort of pairing. The goal is to launch roughly 2 funds every 4 months. And what we'd like to do is launch sort of thematic social causes, right? So obviously this is an empowerment theme where we're empowering historically disenfranchised communities, particularly in corporate America, giving them another medium to have their voice heard. And we really have been targeting these 2 strategies for 2 years now, and it just so happens that we're going to be launching within the next few months in a period that we couldn't have. We certainly didn't see this amount of consternation relative to these causes coming down in the marketplace. So you can think 2 years ago, I think it was a relatively calm environment, different administration, different sort of media environment. So it's just kind of happenstance that we're launching these alongside, all these revelations we've got in the media.
Yeah, so kind of stemming from what you said earlier, I mean, we're living in a very interesting and I would say long-awaited moment in history where women and their voices are being heard and being recognized. So, for instance, the hashtag MeToo movement, it's a result of sexual harassment, misconduct, and abuse allegations against many top figures across many different industries, from Harvey Weinstein to now Matt Lauer. Do you think there's a role that Impact Shares' Women's Empowerment ETF can play in helping to further this cause?
Absolutely, and that's really the idea behind Impact Shares. And so there's really three factors that we're creating impact through. One of which is by collaborating to have a well-defined system of metrics by which we can measure sort of corporate behavior and policies and procedures and controls relative to these issues. We're giving companies a clear roadmap by which they can follow, and by inclusion in the index, it's almost a good housekeeping seal of approval that they have appropriate policies in place to end not just corporate policy practices and policies, but also their products and services are conducive to women's empowerment, for example, right? So they've got a roadmap. They know what to do, and there's incentive to do it through inclusion in the index. Secondly, and I think it's really, really important, is that Impact Shares is a nonprofit advisor. So all of the net advisory proceeds go back to the collaborating nonprofit to create further engagement in the cause. And that number is roughly $500,000 for every $100 million invested, which seems like a lot of money, but when you look at the entire ESG space in the United States, it's roughly $9 trillion. So there's a lot of assets out there, and if we could just capture fractions of that, we can create a real meaningful income stream back to the collaborating nonprofit to create further engagement and advance the mission further. And then lastly, it's really about engaging the investing public and giving them an avenue by which they can allocate capital. And if you view Impact Shares as sort of a utility where every social issue is represented, it can really be sort of a barometer of social causes and where society is placing more or less importance from, a corporate citizenship perspective. So additional revenue for the nonprofits, a clear roadmap for corporate America, and then engaging an investor base. Those are really the three mechanisms by which we're really trying to create meaningful impact relative to the social cost.
Sticking with the women's empowerment product here, WOMN, which is a phenomenal ticker choice, by the way. Happy that was open for you guys and glad you chose it. It's not the only women-focused ETF out there, and it seems like trying to capture the women investing corner of the market is something many have wanted to do for a while now. What do you think makes this fund different than others? Is it the core mission or the stocks of the company it seeks to hold?
I think there's sort of fidelity in cause, right? Like if you look at the people we're bringing to bear on this solution, we're using a firm out of the Netherlands called Equileap, and all they do is gender research, and we've got roughly 20 metrics that we're considering from a social screen perspective when evaluating a company. The largest sort of women's ETF that's available in the marketplace today has 3. And then obviously with the YWCA's involvement, the idea is to not only solve for the issues as they stand today, but also to continue to evolve the metrics, to continue to create engagement around the cause using a registered fund format, right? And it's really perfectly structured to create engagement. If you think about it, as a registered fund, we're required to have an annual shareholder meeting, right? And so for us, that really takes the form of bringing in the index constituents, those companies that are doing well, bringing in companies that want to be included and so that they can understand what they need to do differently, bringing in the investor base that are allocating their capital, and then most importantly, bringing in the nonprofit who is really kind of the arbiter of that cause. And so the idea is we're creating almost a virtuous circle of capital that is helping to facilitate engagement with this kind of ecosystem that we're creating. And that, to me, is the most meaningful and powerful difference, is we're not creating a solution where you're just kind of dropping money and forgetting about it. We're really trying to create an ecosystem to drive collaboration and engagement. And the only way to do that is to really be pure of intent, in that we're a nonprofit and we're really just looking to harness the power of capital markets on behalf of nonprofits to influence their cause outside of just receiving charitable gifts.
So like WOMN, the launch of NACP, another great ticker choice, by the way, the Minority Empowerment ETF, it's incredibly timely. Both of these ETFs and funds, they've come at a really great time. But in 2017, conversations surrounding NFL players' right to take a knee, which all started with Colin Kaepernick last season, they were inescapable. And even the president chimed in at one point. So picking and scoring companies that fight racial injustice seems like a really difficult thing to measure. How are you able to do that? Like, what were your guidelines?
Yeah, and so we're still in the process of finalizing the index, but certainly diversity in hiring practices, pay and promotion, representation on the board, representation within management are all factored in. But also, and as you are probably familiar with, a lot of the sort of industry-specific information that we might want to use is self-reported by companies, so it's not readily available in all situations. But what we're doing is we've got some great research from a professor at one of the HBCUs that identifies those industries that are disproportionately consumed by minorities in the United States. So they clearly have a broader impact on minorities. So we identify those industries, and then we kind of create aspirational goals for those industries, things that we would like for them to be doing differently, that we may not actually have the data for inclusion within the index itself. But as I mentioned previously, it's not just about solving for the issues as they stand today or solving based on the data that's available today, but also indicating to all of the stakeholders, this is where we would like to go relative to this cause, and really encouraging them to self-report how they are effectively engaging in that, right? And then really make a case for them that they deserve inclusion based on some of these other metrics that are more aspirational and potentially industry-specific. For the first pass, it's really going to be largely pay, promotion, representation on boards, representation on management.
As we wrap up here, reflecting on the things that you have shared with us today, it really does seem like these two ETFs are prime examples of both supporting social initiatives and creating a significant and positive social impact. As social issues like affordable healthcare and housing, climate change, and educational opportunities, among many other things, continue to dominate our headlines, do you think this kind of do the right thing investing will become more popular?
Absolutely, Ryan. And I think that if you look at the correlation between the growth in ESG investing and the growth in passive investing, particularly since '08, it's pretty phenomenal. And what I think that really reflects is the investing public's skepticism about Wall Street's ability to generate superior risk-adjusted returns. So they're taking their money out of sort of the stock pickers' portfolios, putting them into passive vehicles, saying, just give me a low-cost equity market return. And then they're also thinking to themselves, what else can I be doing with my capital that's meaningful and I can derive value from? And ESG is a natural extension of that, because capital allocation is really just the effective and efficient use of resources in society to sort of drive sort of society's path forward and goals. So it's kind of just inverting the sort of risk-adjusted return, making that kind of a secondary investment objective, and really focusing on the social implications of capital allocation. So I think that will just continue to grow. And then when you have $30 trillion of wealth transfer from baby boomers to millennials over the next 2 decades, with 85% of millennials wanting social considerations in their portfolio, I think it's really ESG, and particularly socially impactful investment strategies, are about to reach an inflection point.
I think that's a great point. And on that note, I want to say thank you again for joining us. It was really insightful and something I think our listeners will really resonate with.
Great. Thank you, Maddy. Thank you, Ryan.